So much. Oh, that was the one thing I forgot to mention. We are going to record this workshop and we'll make it available once we've been able to do some editing and make sure that we've been able to, keep everybody's privacy maintained. So, thank you for that. And I'm sorry that I neglected to mention that earlier. So, okay, now I'm done. Steve, thank you.
No worries at all, Sandy. Thank you so much for the introduction, the kind words. Good afternoon, morning, good day, I suppose I suppose we could say to everyone. My name is Steve Keller. I'm the content creator and national speaker for Drug Free Kids Canada. Some of you have perhaps seen me present in the past over the years. I've been doing public speaking for about the last 10 years, since about 2020. I did about 3 years doing public speaking for the Y of Canada and their youth cannabis awareness program. I moved over to DFK a couple years ago and have been doing virtual and in-person presentations all across the country ever since. Was just out in New Brunswick a couple weeks ago, so it's kind of fun to get to work on the left coast, I suppose, today. It's going to be a wonderful time. Now, joining me this afternoon in co-facilitation, we have Sarah Keeman. Do you want to take a moment and introduce yourself there, Sarah?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Sarah Keeman. I'm the Outreach Officer for Drug Free Kids Canada. My background's in addictions and mental health. Just want to say thank you, everyone, for having us today, and I'm really looking forward to the information that's going to be shared.
Oh, as am I. We're going to have a blasty blast today. Got a nice big group, which is good because having a large amount of participants means that we can encourage, as we always do, dialogue and conversation. You'll notice that the subtitle of this workshop is a strong start, navigating stress, coping, and substance use. We're going to get into all of that. But the title of the series that we run here at DFK is called Let's Talk Drugs. And those words matter. That idea of talk, that idea of dialogue. We're going to share a lot of knowledge today. We have research, we have evidence we need to share. It's our job. But what matters in terms of conversing about substance use is the conversation of itself. Many of you who are listening are parents, your providers that work with youth, your professionals involved in youth lives. You could be educators, you could be youth workers, you could be social workers, you could be young adults yourselves. If I was to come in and try to encourage you to have healthy, non judgmental dialogue for youth, but I spent 90 minutes just lecturing at you, it's pretty hypocritical, isn't it? It is. So, what I try to do is encourage more dialogue. If you have questions, if there's anything you want to know, do not hesitate to ask. I'm going to ask questions to find out what you know as we go along as well. Because it's one thing, again, for me to share evidence and knowledge. Like I said, we'll do that. But it's also important to have an understanding that if there's something you want to know more about, we can give you as much as possible today. And if there's anything that we're missing, we do have various resources we can help connect you with, whether that's through our own website at drugfreekidscanada.org, shameless self promotion number one, or if it's just through getting into referrals to support resources that are available all across Canada. Did I miss anything there, Sarah? No. Fantastic.
You did get,
So,
sorry, I have to unmute myself.
no worries. A little bit about ourselves. So, our vision at DFK is to ensure that young people can live their lives free of problematic substance use and addiction. Now, the word problematic here matters. And I'll tell you why. You see, sometimes people hear our title, Drug Free Kids, a brand we're actually changing. So, a little bit later on in the year, we're going to have a new title over the next couple months. But sometimes they hear our name and they think that our job is to come in and promote abstinence, simply choosing not to use drugs. For decades, that was the rhetoric surrounding substance use, that substance use was bad, substance use was immoral, and the only safe way to have a conversation about substances was just tell people don't do it. Abstinence works in theory, but Sarah, does abstinence only work in practice?
Not really. I mean, if you look at like our communities and our families, like substance use is a part of our lives. We use it for medication. Sometimes we have family gatherings and we have alcohol there. So it's not a reality of abstinence really in our communities.
Precisely. And so with that in mind, it's not about saying that our job is to have people live their lives free of substance use, period. We will show risks and harms with a hope that we can reduce substance use, of course. But we understand that there are people that are listening that will choose to use. There are clients that you work with who will choose to use. There are people listening today that choose to use. I am not here to say that's a bad thing. I'm not here to say it's a good thing. I'm here to point out what risk might look like, what harm can look like, with an end goal of trying to give you strategies to reduce the risk of problematic substance use. Or, in other words, discussing things like harm reduction just as much as being able to acknowledge that abstinence is an option and itself is actually an example of harm reduction. They don't exist separately. So, a little bit about the agenda for today. Straightforward one, actually. We've got three things on the agenda. The first, very straightforward. We are going to conduct a self assessment activity on Menti, and I'll give you the link in just a moment. This activity is to help our audience reflect on the impacts of stress in our own lives. We're discussing substance use, but really, this is a mental health presentation. I always say it's a mental health talk disguised as a substance use presentation. Really, what we're talking about today is stress. We're talking about anxiety. We're talking about depression. These are heavy topics, and we know that they unfortunately carry a tightly knit connection to substance use. More on that later. But before we can really understand how that impacts youth, we have to understand how it impacts us. Where do we stand on it? What are our interpretations of stress and anxiety? From there, we are going to discuss the impact of various coping strategies and coping mechanisms, both adaptive and maladaptive, or on those lovely terms later, including substance use on stress and anxiety. Or, to put it simply, we're going to talk about whether substance use helps improve anxiety or whether it makes it worse, or both, and why that is. Third, we're going to talk about risk and protective factors that impact harmful substance use and how to promote youth wellness at various stages of development. I understand the conversations that you have about drugs with a 10-year-old are not the conversations you're going to have about drugs with a 25-year-old. People's understanding change, their interests change, their state of mind change. I have two nephews, 6 years old, 4 years old. They're in love with Bluey, that Australian cartoon dog TV show. Not expecting that when they turn 40 years old, they're still going to be in love with Bluey. I mean, maybe they are. Their father is super obsessed with it. Who knows? The reason I say this is that people's mentality changes, their interests change, and their knowledge base changes. So you're not going to have the same conversation, like I said, at one point in life as you will at another. So we're going to talk about how that evolves over time. And then I know I said there's three parts. The last part is very straightforward. We're going to give you like a 60-second post-workshop survey. All right. Now, we have a self-assessment activity to do. And to do this activity, we are going to go visit Menti. So, if you've never used a Mentimeter before, they're pretty straightforward. What you're going to do is you're going to visit menti.com and you're going to enter the following code. You can see it here. It is 42979513. I just put it into the chat. I just realized that Zoom won't show you the chat on my screen that you were seeing, but it's in the chat. And what's going to happen is when you enter that code, you're going to see a screen that looks like this. The self-assessment exercise. Now, this was created by the Canadian Centre on Substance Use and Addiction, specifically looking at bias surrounding cannabis, but it translates very well into conversations around substance use and mental health in general. So we're going to use it as sort of an intro to get us started today. So please take a minute. You can hop on in. Give you guys a couple moments to get logged in. See some people joining. Welcome to the presentation. For those of you just joining us, we're heading over to Menti to do a little Mentimeter to start things off. So I've put the code and the website in the link there. Were you able to get logged on there, Sarah?
I was. I'm logged in.
Terrific. All right. So the first question that I have for the audience, now that I'm here, you should have an option to be able to enter it in, is this. What were some stresses that you experienced as a youth? How reports and evidence show rate of child neurological developments or high risk of drugs and substance. I see I got a question here for Hannah, or from Hannah. Says how children evidence show rate of children with neurological disorders are high risk in drugs and substance. We can probably get to this a little bit later. I know that when we look at individuals that are living with particular, I'll say disorders, not only neurological, but mental related, that there may be a greater risk to turning to substance use to try to manage some of the symptomology. And we can talk a little bit more about this when we get into risk. It's a good question, but we'll get to it a little bit later. Don't let me forget it, Sarah, because, I spend so much time remembering knowledge that other times I have the memory span of a goldfish. But
I
the
will.
point of it. Sorry?
I will remind you.
Right, you're the best. So we got questions coming up. What were stresses that you experienced as a youth when you were a teen? We see things like school, stress, economics, fitting in, not being understood, moving, loneliness, social abuse, parent passing away. I'm sorry to see that. Academics, family, bullying, social shunning, homeworks, a lack of understanding. The one of the things I like about this Menti is it's anonymous. I don't get to see who puts their name on anything. What I do get to see though is the common threads. One thing about Menti is it likes to make words bigger that pop up commonly. And the words that are more common tend to move towards the middle. So we see things like bullying come up here, the things like school come up here, that need to fit in, that social aspect that exists in youth lives. The other thing about this list is, yes, there are more common themes, but this is not a small list. It's not just like we grew up as a teen and had one stressor in our life. And furthermore, if you look at the stress that faces youth nowadays, in many cases, it comes back to the same themes that we faced 20, 30, 40 years ago. We didn't have social media in the 1990s, right? Social media was calling someone up, but you still had to deal with bullying. Now, bullying has changed. Bullying follows youth home now more than it ever did because they can't get away from social media. There's that desperate need to fit in. We still see that nowadays. We see that with people's desire to be seen, to be noticed through their social platforms. The idea of loneliness, the idea of constant moving. There are still families that move around. There's that lack of sort of accomplishment or that need for success that we have. The reason I like to start with this question is it's to remind ourselves that stress comes from a wide array of places. And often when we're having conversations with young people about stressors in their life, they may only tell us one or two things when the reality is their stress load is far heavier than we recognize. And we may try to focus on one or two things, but it's also worth noting that there are still other things that are stressing them out. All we can do is support them in the things they bring to us. And that list gets very long. Now, question number 2. When you were experiencing those pressures in the list that you saw, when you felt lonely, when you felt bullied, when you struggled at school, when your families were moving, when you were dealing with grief, when you were dealing with loss, when you were dealing with family suffering, when you were dealing with personal suffering, what did you need when you were younger? Not what do you need now? What did you need then? Sarah, when you were younger, what was something that stressed you out? One
Um,
thing off topic.
Schoolwork, like academic expectations, sometimes managing my schedule. So I participated in a lot of extracurriculars, and sometimes those demands affected my ability to perform academically just because of timing. So
Absolutely. Now, when you were stressed out, what did you feel you needed? What helped you get through?
support, understanding from the people around me. Sometimes it was just, shutting down and like getting a quiet space and like, giving myself some time. Yeah, but definitely like emotional support from my friends and family really did help.
Okay. Well, some of the responses that we're seeing from the audience include friendship, support, feeling validated, kindness, someone to listen, a sense of empathy, a sense of belonging. Now, where that belonging could come from could be a very wide conversation. Friends to be reassuring, understanding, someone to talk with, someone who cared. Do you notice there's a word that pops up here more than any other? I see it there. I see it there. I see it there. I see it explained in a different way here. I see it explained in a different way here. I see it explained in a different way here. And I see it explained in a different way here. It's support. When you were experiencing pressures, one of the hardest things was to feel alone. And you wanted to feel supported. You wanted to feel like someone had your back. Why do I bring that up? Many of you who are listening today are now on the other side of that table. You are now the ones that provide that support for youth. When you were younger, when you were stressed, when you were anxious, and when you were frustrated, did you need someone to fix your problems? No. And I know that because nobody put it here. You didn't need someone to fix it for you. You just needed someone to be there to take care, to support you while you worked on what you needed. Oftentimes, when we see people dealing with stress, we try to think of, well, how can we fix them? How can we make it better? We can't. All we can do is be there. All we can do is offer them strategies, and we're going to talk about those strategies today. That's going to come up in this discussion. Now, this brings me to my third question. How do you manage stress and anxiety in your personal life today? What cheers you up when you have a bad day? Is it going for a walk? Is it hitting the gym? Is it drinking a couple beers? Is it going out with friends? Is it playing video games and taking a nap? Is it eating a snack? Is it eating lots of snacks? I don't know your process. What cheers you up? How do you manage your stress, your anxiety? Sarah, what do you do to manage stress and anxiety?
For me, listening to music definitely is my first go-to. Sometimes
Mhm.
meditation. Yeah, sometimes it is going for a walk and getting some fresh air. Other times it's
Mhm.
talking to a close friend. Yeah.
Mhm. Okay. So we have walking, we have something mentally stimulating, like listening to music, and we have that idea of spending time with someone. Now, when you spend time with a friend, do you have to talk with them about what's bothering you? Sometimes, yay, nay, maybe.
It depends. I think for me, it depends on the moment. Sometimes I need a distraction, so I don't really want to talk about whatever's going on. So it's whatever. If they bring up something that they want to talk about, I'm happy to engage because sometimes I need to disassociate from what I'm going through.
Absolutely. Now, if we look at the managing stress and anxieties list that's popping up here, one of my favorite things about this question is that this list is always going to be huge. This list can never be small. And the fact that it is large speaks to the health of the people that are listening. We have people talking about going for a walk, getting fresh air, spending time alone, going out in nature, reading, exercising, writing, taking a shower, taking medication, spending time with a loved one, playing with their baby, sitting back, relaxing, having a snack, going to the beach, cleaning the beach, even better. I like it. There's a wide array of strategies here to manage stress and anxiety. What you're talking about here is coping. There's different types of coping, and we're going to talk about that today and how these can actually be grouped into different coping categories. But what you're talking about here are coping mechanisms, the ways that we try to manage and sometimes not, overcome whatever it is that's causing the stress and anxiety. This list cannot be small. And I say that because you do not have one coping strategy to manage everything. For example, if someone were to say to me their only coping strategy is to take a nap, what happens if you can't sleep? If someone were to say to me, my only coping strategy is to have snacks, what if you're nowhere near a vending machine or a restaurant or a convenience store or home? You have multiple strategies to manage stress. And the fact that all of you can give me a multitude of answers speaks to the fact that you're aware of this. More on that later. Question number 4. I told you this is going to be a conversation about substance use. So, what kind of a relationship would you say that you have with substances based on your experiences and the experiences of those that you care about? Would you say you've had a positive relationship with them? Would you say you've had a negative relationship with them? Would you say it's somewhere in the middle? See, when the CCSA created this question, they only like to ask if it's positive or negative, and I found that was really polarizing for many people. So I like to kind of give them that out. Some people confidently will say that substances have created negatives in their life, and I can understand why. That could be someone who's thinking about impaired driving. That could be someone who's thinking about a hospitalization. It could be someone thinking about perhaps a fentanyl overdose or a heroin overdose. That could be someone thinking about someone passing away due to lung cancer caused by tobacco use. Now, for the people that look at substance use and mention a positive, this could be your people talking about using medications, day to day prescriptions. This could be people talking about having a drink on a Friday night once in a while with their friends and socializing with a designated driver. For those people that have more of a neutral take, it could be that they haven't thought about it. It could be that they can think of both, but don't want to lean too far one way or the other. But the reason I like to bring this one up is especially when you're a care provider working with youth, sometimes our previous existing relationship with substance use can paint the way we talk about it with young people. If we have only seen negatives, we may find our conversation biasing towards negatives and harms and sort of the risks of substance use. But to a young person that's using, if we can't understand and really communicate that we understand why they're using, they start to shut us out. On the flip side, if we have someone that we're concerned their substance use could become a problem, But all we can think about in our conversation are maybe the fun we've had while using or the benefits that we've seen while using. If that message comes across too strongly, we may mislead a youth and have them then turn to substance use thinking it's not as risky as it actually is. So it's a complicated sort of a relationship we have. But it's why it becomes so important to remember to leave our own biases at the back to be able to communicate both the applications, potential benefits if they exist, as well as the harms. Because our goal is to try to create informed decision making for young people and to promote them to make safer and healthier choices, regardless of what those will be. When we look at substance use as a positive or a negative, we take a step away from that and we start moving back into that old conversation about drugs are bad or drugs are not bad. Last question. Sarah, is all substance use bad? Is all substance use harmful?
No, I don't think it's fair to say it's always harmful or problematic. I think it's about a bit of a spectrum because sometimes if you're in a car accident and you need a pain reliever, it's beneficial for you at the time. And a lot of the times people think pain relievers are just, hardcore opioids, but a lot of the time it's like Tylenol and acetaminophen. So yeah, no.
So the follow-up question I would have then for you is can substance use become
Absolutely. It can absolutely become harmful for sure.
my question then from there for the audience is what does that look like? If you don't understand why someone could allow themselves to use substances, how do you check your bias when you can't wrap your head around why or how someone would go down that road? That's a great question. And it actually sort of leads to, I think you're kind of answering your question here in and of itself. The fact you're asking that question suggests you have curiosity about it too. Sometimes when we talk about substance use, again, we think we have to be the lector. We think that we have to impart the knowledge. If we can't understand that, then one of the things we can do to even just build a little more rapport with youth is ask them why someone would go down that road. It's asking them why did they start? What factors got them to consider using substances in the first place? And often I do other presentations on substance use in general. I do presentations specifically about cannabis, specifically about opioids, specifically about alcohol, cocaine, nicotine, sedatives, hallucinogens, you name it, I can do a presentation on. And one of the things I always ask in those presentations is why do they think young people use drugs? So if we can't wrap our head around it, one of the first questions we can often ask someone is why they would use or why they think someone would use. And then the second question can actually become why do they think they wouldn't? And the reason you ask both is that number one, it helps create that sense of empathy. If we understand that someone's turned to using substances, say to respond to trauma or to grief or to suffering in their life, we can ask what's been done to sort of manage those feelings otherwise and whether that substance use has actually remedied that problem. And it's not to say they're wrong for doing so, it's to have them be able to ask that question of themselves. On the other hand, if you ask a youth why they don't use, and say they talk about the fact I don't smoke because I play sports, get them to talk with you more about the sports they play. And you might say, well, I'm not talking about drugs anymore. Well, of course you're not. That's not the conversation that has to happen. The conversation that that youth needs in that moment is a chance for them to talk about their interests. And when you can ask them about the sport they play, the activity they play, their health, their fitness, it reminds them that the values they have around substance use are less so or less important to them than their need for health. And it's a strong value to have. So if you don't understand, it's okay to ask those questions. Now, back to the question at hand. What does problematic or harmful substance use look like? Creating negative impacts in your life, denying thinking, neglecting personal health, isolation, someone using substances every day, creating problems. So, again, we do see that most of you understand this very clearly. It's the idea that substance use can become problematic when we start to see harms and negative outcomes in a person's life. And we are going to talk much more about this today. So again, I want to thank you for starting out this lovely mentee with me. You all filled it out quite admirably. And we will move back to the content at hand. No more questions for you. All right, next question for you. I'm just kidding. I like to ask questions that go along. As I do presentations, I love asking poll questions to the audience. So the first poll question I have for you, and you can put this one in the chat panel on Zoom, is the most common mental health condition reported among young people in Canada, according to Stats Canada, is schizophrenia, mood disorders, anxiety disorders, or depression. So, these are the top four most commonly reported mental health disorders among young people. But which one do you think is number one? You can take a moment and put this in the chat panel. Let me know what you think. I see depression. I see anxiety, depression, anxiety. A lot of people kind of leaning back and forth between the two of these. Depression. The number one answer is anxiety. Anxiety disorders do stand out as number one. Now, it's worth noting, and this is a very important thing, is that quite often when young people learn about anxiety or they feel anxious, they get this misconception that all anxiety is a bad thing. They think anxiety is terrifying. They think anxiety is unhealthy. Anxiety is very natural. Natural anxiety occurs when we worry or feel nervous about a various thing. We learned this in evolution over hundreds and thousands of millions of years. It's that learned response to the sound in the bush in the middle of the night. I don't know what that sound is. It's going to scare me. That's anxiety. Anxiety is that feeling of I don't know what to expect. I can't control it. I can't respond to it. So I start to feel uncomfortable. That allows us to be more judgmental of a situation going on. That allows us to assess a threat level. And that allows us to be in a position to keep safe. Anxiety is not in itself unhealthy, it is a human and natural response. So we feel anxiety about all kinds of things. Could be school, work, relationships, our health, or changes in our lives. And when we feel anxious, the common symptoms we experience are things like restlessness, tension, sweating, exhaustion, dry mouth, dizziness, increased heart rate or blood pressure. We may find it difficult to focus. We may become irritable or even fearful. Again, in proper situations, in appropriate situations, whereby we don't know what's going to happen, we don't know what to expect. Anxiety is a normal emotion. That's no different than someone laughing at a cheesy joke that I make or being frustrated if someone cuts you off on the highway. Those are learned responses that we have. Now, what's the difference between that and anxiety disorder? Anxiety disorder is excessive worrying around a number of everyday problems, especially over a longer period of time. We'll say 6 months or longer, according to the CMHA. This anxiety is often much stronger than anticipated. Natural anxiety would be a student who feels a little bit nervous, their stomach's a little bit upset, they've got a little bit of dizziness because they're coming in to write an exam and they've never done one before. They're uncertain, they've studied, they've prepared, but they're still uncertain. It's not unhealthy, that's reasonable. Disordered anxiety would be a student not wanting to come to class because they're afraid that something is going to happen in every single class they go to. It's an irrational response. There's no markers or signs that this would continue to happen or that this should happen, but they feel this way beyond their own control. Their symptoms become more sort of exaggerated, they become more strong, they feel significant tension, nervousness, or fear about minor concerns. This could be someone that feels uncomfortable at the thought of having a shower because that means they have to leave the house. This could be someone that refuses to go out to parties with friends because they're scared to be in big groups of people. This is where we start to see a little bit more of disordered anxiety. Now, how frequent is this? We know that the prevalence of Canadians age 15 and above with generalized anxiety disorder actually doubled in a 10-year window. Now, particularly, this increased among teens and young adults. This was driven largely by your 15 to 24 demographic. In particular, females themselves saw a 3 times increase in generalized anxiety over that 10-year window. Now, youth under the age of 25 were also more than twice as likely to report a substance use disorder than the overall average. It's also worth noting they were also more likely to report an anxiety disorder. More in a moment. Now, the World Health Organization estimates that about 4%, so about 1 in 25 of the global population currently experience an anxiety disorder. And about 1 in 4 hospitalizations for children and youth between the ages of 5 to 24 in Canada were specifically for mental health conditions in the year 2020. So 1 in 5 hospitalizations, 1 in 4 hospitalizations were actually situations when we looked at young people in Canada who were not hospitalized due to an injury, due to a collision on the highway, due to a physical illness, but a mental health related condition, with anxiety related issues ranking at or near the top in nearly all cases. Now, substance use and mental health are inseparable. We talk about this a lot, but it's important numerically to understand it. We know that youth under the age of 25 are more likely to experience mental illness and substance use disorder than any other age range, and it's not even close. About 90% of people who live with addictions actually begin using substances in adolescence. Now, since the pandemic, we've also been seeing problematic substance use converging with mental health challenges at a much greater scale. Or, put it more simply, youth have always been more vulnerable to issues with substance use and mental health. Substance use, in particular, having to do with the processes of how the brain develops and understands reward systems because substances like to hijack that. We'll talk more about it later. But it's also worth noting people with a mental illness are twice as likely to have or develop a substance use disorder compared to the general population. And people with a substance use disorder are 3 times more likely to report a mental illness than the rest of the population. If you were attacked or suffered deep trauma in a situation, naturally you would have elevated anxiety. Absolutely. Over what length of time or exposure is deemed appropriate to experiencing extreme anxiety before it is considered a problem in that situation? This would be more of a question for a clinician. One thing I know, again, going back to generalized disordered anxiety, would be that you would see these more elevated, I don't want to say inappropriate responses, but I'll say elevated responses over a 6 month period or longer. That would be CMHA's sort of take on it. But if you wanted to look at more sort of response to trauma, you would have to speak with a clinician or with a mental health advisor because everyone's situation could differ from one person to the next in terms of how they respond to stress and stimuli. Some people that will go away in a few weeks, some people a few months, some people it could be years. It's a great question, and it's one I strongly recommend that you would speak directly with a healthcare provider. Does abandonment creating any of these disorders? We know that neglect is a considered a risk factor when we look at harmful or problematic substance use. We're going to talk more about risk factors a little bit later. So it's a very good question. Again, I'm glad that you asked because it is going to come up towards the end of the presentation. It's a good question. You guys are right on the ball today. I like this. Let's think about the self-assessment piece that we did a little while ago. One of the questions that I asked in that section was, how do you manage stress and anxiety in your personal life? Now, the responses that our audience provided were largely examples of things that we call coping strategies. They're the things that we do in response to challenges in our lives. When I do presentations in person, and I've presented for high schools, universities, federal government representation, prisons, after school programs, like I've seen every demographic I can possibly think of at this point. One of my favorite things when I talk about coping is I ask how many of them have had a bad day in the last 2 weeks, and every hand in the room goes up. And then I ask, what do you do when you have a bad day? Because what we get them to think about are coping mechanisms. Now, mechanisms, coping strategies are the things, like I said, that we do to manage stress, reduce anxiety, and overcome difficult emotions. And you gave me a big list of them earlier. I can even show it to you. Nice big list, right? This list right here: reading, solidarity walk, self reflection, going for a walk, talking with friends. I jumped back a slide. I did not mean to do that. Walking, playing with a baby, gardening. There's a wide array of coping strategies that we all have. And I'm glad that you gave me so many responses because it gives us a great list to play with. So, when we look at coping strategies, they break into 4 categories. The first is behavioral. This is when someone takes action to reduce stress. Stress can cause and be caused by physical issues in our lives. If you go and speak with a healthcare provider, with a doctor, with a physician about stress, I've been feeling stressed, I've been feeling run down. Often, what they will ask you, they'll ask you 3 questions very often. The first they're going to ask is how much sleep you've been getting. The second they're going to ask is how your diet has been. And the third they're going to ask is about your physical activity and exercise. Because what they're trying to do is they're trying to measure how many behavioral coping strategies you've been employing. Have you been getting 6 to 8 hours of sleep a night? Have you been eating a regular amount of calories, a regular amount of nutrients, a balanced diet? Have you been conducting or taking part in physical activity that you were doing on a regular basis before? Has that changed? What they're looking at are these examples of physically taking time to promote healthy lifestyle choices that put us in a better place physically to manage stress and anxiety. Before I worked in substance use, I used to do public speaking on gambling addiction. And one of the things I talked about a lot was video game addiction and online gaming disorder. And a common conversation that would come up with young people was how they talked about stress and anxiety. They had more panic attacks than they had ever had before. They passed out more than ever before. They were dizzy. They were overtired. They were run down when they came to school. So I'd often ask them, how many of you went to sleep after midnight at least twice in the past week. Every hand in the room went up. 3 times, every hand in the room went up. 4 times, every hand in the room went up. Most of them were getting about 4 hours of sleep, 3 or 4 hours of sleep. And then they were coming to school the next day overtired. They could not physically handle the stressors of a day-to-day basis because they were staying up all night, drinking caffeine and gaming until 3 a.m., getting up at 6 o'clock and then going to school and trying to conduct a normal day. And then they couldn't figure out why their body was fighting them about that. That's like filling your car with a half a tank of gas and then kicking the tire when your car runs out of gas down the highway half as far as you thought it would. Your body still needs rest. So that behavioral coping strategy of sleep is very important. Second, we have cognitive strategies. Cognitive strategies are when we think about a situation and change how we think with the goal of managing our expectations. Stress and anxiety can make it very difficult to consider a situation clearly because when blood starts flowing to the middle of the brain, right around the amygdala, during that time we feel anxious, it tends to cut off responses from the more logical front of the brain. So, what starts to happen is as we feel anxious, it becomes very difficult for us to process what that anxiety means. So, what we try to do with cognitive coping is find other ways to stimulate the front of our brain, the logical centers of our brain, to get us to think about a situation with more of a clear head. Third, we have emotional strategies. These are the mentally stimulating activities a person does to change their emotional response. Sarah, you mentioned one of these earlier, is listening to music. Think about when you're working in the office and you're having a hard time focusing, you're feeling a little bit uncomfortable, so you put some music on. That's emotional coping. What you're doing is you're trying to change how your body feels. You're trying to change your emotional reaction to give you more focus to work through the day. The fourth coping strategy, by far the most difficult, is called active coping. This is when we directly face what's causing us stress. If we had an issue at work, that's directly speaking with the individual that caused us a problem. If we had an issue at home with someone we care about, that's taking the time to speak with them directly. If we have an issue with our health, that's taking the time to go to the doctor to get it diagnosed. Active coping is one of the hardest things to do because it means we have to face our fears. It means we have to face and accept the impact of the trauma or the hardship we're going through and take action to improve our state. I'm not explaining these because they're simple. I'm explaining them because it's what they are. Now, coping can even be split into 2 categories. We have what's called adaptive coping. Adaptive coping strategies are the things that we try to do to help change our behavior with the end goal of overcoming a challenge. Now, these coping strategies are more likely to result in a positive outcome. Sarah, knowing that adaptive coping is something that we do to feel better with the end goal of getting through what's bothering us, could you think of an example of an active or an adaptive, rather, coping strategy?
Okay, sorry. Yeah, like for example, like if I'm feeling overwhelmed with schoolwork, like I mentioned before, an adaptive strategy might be making a to-do list, breaking those tasks into smaller groups and steps if needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you're actually laying out a plan.
Yes.
The strategies that many of you talked about earlier when we did that Menti are actually examples of adaptive coping. Listening to music is emotional adaptive coping. I'm trying to calm down my emotions so I can get back to what's stressing me out. Spending time with friends, spending time with loved ones, with our kids, with our pets, that's adaptive coping because what you're doing is you're bringing people that make you feel safe around. You may talk about what's bothering you with them. Even if you don't, what you're doing is you're trying to make yourself feel more secure. There's journaling. People do this with blogs. People do this with journals. There's regular sleep. There's balanced diet. There's physical exercise. This is adaptive coping. When we talk about strategies that we do to try to overcome our problems, we're often talking about adaptive coping. Now, the second type of coping is called maladaptive. These are also known as escapes. When people talk about an escape when they're feeling stressed, these are the strategies that we use to try to like temporarily reduce our anxiety, but it doesn't really make the stress go away. I'm going to give you 6 examples, and I'm willing to bet that almost all of you either have done or know someone that has done at least one of these. Let's start with this question. You're driving down the highway. It's 5 o'clock in the afternoon. You've had a long week. You're getting just up to speed, and a car comes flying up the left side of the road, cuts you off without signaling, and you almost plow into the back of them. What's the first thought going through your head when that car cuts you off to slam on the brakes in front of you? I'm going to take a shot in the dark on this and assume it is not, hey, great to see you. I'm going to guess it might have something to do with what we call aggression. Aggression is maladaptive coping. It's the flipping someone off on the highway. It's that we are so angry, we're so frustrated. We're not going to attack them. It's not that. But we're trying to let our emotions out. Aggressive outbursts. It's the cursing. It's the flipping off. It's when something goes wrong. It's that immediate response to be frustrated. That's not unhealthy. That's natural. We do that. But more on that in a moment. The second maladaptive coping strategy is isolation. Sometimes when we've had a bad day, we just want to be alone. Now, next we have avoidance. Something's going on. This is the person who says, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it. Okay. Fourth, we have the opposite. The person who can't stop talking about it. The person who can't stop thinking about it. Think about that night. You ever had a night when you like wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a bill you have to pay? Or wake up in the middle of the night thinking about a project you have to work on, but you can't do anything about it except lie in bed and obsess about it? It's called rumination. That's maladaptive coping. Our brain is trying to come up with a strategy, even though logically we know we can't solve it while lying in bed. But we're going to try to over and over and over and over. Binge eating is an example of maladaptive coping. Binge eating is different than, say, once in a while treating yourself to a bowl of ice cream. Binge eating is if every time you have a bad day, you have a bowl of ice cream. If every time you have a bad day, you go get it. And then finally, we have substance use. Maladaptive coping strategies are, again, they're natural responses. We want something that makes us feel better quickly. We can't always go with the strategy that's going to fix a problem. Sometimes we just need to get away from it for a bit. Where these examples are more likely to lead to negative outcomes are when they become our primary coping strategy. If every time we have a bad day, we go to McDonald's. If every time we get stressed out at work, we repress those feelings and hold them inside. They don't go away on their own. If every time we have an issue on the highway, our response is to scream at someone, is to get upset at someone, eventually, there's a good possibility someone's going to scream back. So we see increased risk of confrontation, increased risk of hurt. In the case of binge eating, increased health risks. I mean, if I go to McDonald's 5 days a week because I have bad days 5 days a week, chances are there's going to be a different kind of a bad day that I'm going to have. And it might have to do with obesity, it might have to do with blood pressure, it might have to do with diabetes. And finally, substance use. Crux of what we're getting into today. People turn to substance use to manage their stress. How frequently do they turn to substance use to manage their stress? Did you know that in the United States, 1 in 5 people that live with anxiety say their primary coping strategy is drinking? In the United Kingdom, that number ranges between 40 to 60%. Now we're presenting for BC. Why do I not have a Canadian number up here? Fun fact, when Stats Canada actually does their national surveys on substance use and they talk about vaping, they ask people, why do you vape? When they ask questions about cannabis, they ask, why do you use cannabis? Opioids, why do you use? Pharmaceuticals, why do you use? When they ask people about alcohol, they don't ask why they use. So I can't give you a Canadian number here because there's no evidence I can find on why Canadians drink. But all the other countries that look at it show that coping is a top 5 reason for drinking. People drink because they're stressed. In Canada, 1 in 5 youth between grades 7 and 12 who report vaping say they do so to relax or relieve stress and tension. About half of teens and young adults that say they use cannabis for a medical purpose do so to treat anxiety or depression, even though over 80% of those who use cannabis medically have never once spoken to a healthcare provider about what that problem is. And finally, 1 in 8 post-secondary youth use pain relievers non-medically do so to cope with stress. This is what we're getting into. This is the center point of the presentation. This presentation is specifically about stress, anxiety, and coping with substance use. And these next few slides are going to examine the impact of substances that you see here on health, on these feelings of stress, anxiety. If you'd like to learn more about the actual health risks, like I said, I do more involved presentations about these substances, cannabis, alcohol, tobacco, opioids, etc. You can visit our website, drugfreekidscanada.org, shameless self-promotion number 2. Or you can stay tuned for more of the future Let's Talk Drugs workshops that I know we've got a couple more booked with the PSSSBC. Did I say enough S's there, Sandy?
You did great, Steve.
Yes.
And I love the shameless promotion. Totally welcome.
Thing if not shamelessly self-promoted. But back to the point at hand. If you ask a young person why they smoke, they say it's because they're stressed. If you ask a young person why they drink, if you ask someone at a bar, why are they drinking at a bar on a Friday night? They had a long week. They're stressed. You ask people, why do they smoke weed? I use it to manage anxiety. Using alcohol or drugs can cause feelings of stress and anxiety to increase or decrease. What do you guys think? Can you put the shameless promotion in chat, please? Absolutely. Sarah, could you pop the website into the chat there too? Beautiful. So yeah, we see decrease, we see increase. No worries. Increase. You know, the beauty about this question is if you said increase, you're correct. If you said decrease, you're correct. The problem with this conversation, and this is why it creates such difficulty, is both of these statements are true. If substance use only caused an increase in stress, people would not use to manage stress. They would know better. That would be like saying if alcohol only caused hangovers, nobody would drink. I mean, I don't really think I'd want to drink a drink that literally made me vomit and want to black out for 24 hours. There's a reason we drink. We don't drink because we want more stress in our life. We drink because we're trying to remove it. But whether or not it actually does that, the answer is yes, and the answer is no. Here's why. In our brain, in order to understand how substance use affects our responses to stress and anxiety, we have to consider what our brain is doing in response to these feelings. The brain produces many different chemicals, known as neurotransmitters. They communicate and relay signals to generate responses to and from the rest of the body. For today's workshop, we're going to discuss two in particular. We're going to talk about dopamine, and we're going to talk about gamma-aminobutyric acid. And if you don't want to try to remember that mouthful of a word, you can just call it GABA. Now, we could talk about others. We could talk about serotonin. We could talk about he's blanking out on all the other neurotransmitter names. There's a wide array. We could talk about glutamate. We're not going to worry about those wide arrays today. We're going to focus on two. One we've had a lot of research on, and a lot of youth have learned a lot about this in school, being dopamine. But GABA is one they don't really quite understand quite as well. And it's very important to understand GABA, especially with the first substance we're going to talk about. Now, dopamine. Dopamine is the neurotransmitter that our brain naturally releases to identify pleasure, motivation, and satisfaction. When we do the things that we enjoy, our brain releases dopamine. It's like a signal to us to remind us, I like this, keep doing it. When I go to Dairy Queen and I buy myself a Blizzard, and I get an Oreo Blizzard, and it tastes so good, there's dopamine releasing from my brain going, I like this, keep doing it. If I see someone I care about and I smile and my eyes light up, that's dopamine telling me, I like that person, go see them. Your brain does this all the time, totally natural. GABA is a more interesting neurotransmitter because it's really more of a neuroinhibitor. What it's known for is regulating the body's nervous system to maintain emotional balance and manage anxiety. When a person is feeling stressed or overwhelmed or anxious or frustrated or nervous, after a period of time, the brain understands it can't feel that sense of heightened awareness forever. It's just going to make it sick. So what it does is it releases GABA into the brain to basically act as a brake pedal and knock other neurotransmitters off of the brain. It's like a hard reset to try to calm a person down. An example I like to give of this is, have you ever seen somebody that's very frustrated, very emotional, very overwhelmed? They could be mad, they could be miserable, they could be nervous, they could be hysterical. And all of a sudden, there's a point that you just watch them go, and you slowly see that come down begin. I would say in that moment, what you're actually seeing is GABA floating through the person's brain. You're watching neurotransmitters get kicked off, and those reactions are starting to change. That's a normal part of stress. It's when our brain starts to calm back down. Alcohol releases tension and reduces inhibition. If you ask people how they feel when they're drunk, they're usually going to say pretty relaxed, pretty loose, pretty mellow. Because what alcohol is a sedative, also known as a central nervous system depressant. It lowers blood pressure, it lowers heart rate, it slows the body down. This makes it a popular substance for teens and adults alike to use when they feel stressed. They drink on a Friday night because they're stressed. They drink on a Saturday night because they're stressed. Now, how does alcohol do this? Well, among other things, What alcohol likes to do is it affects dopamine and GABA in the brain. First of all, drinking alcohol, as well as many other drugs, causes a large amount of dopamine to pump through the brain. And what this does is it tells us, I like this, keep doing it. But it does it at a higher level than many other activities we enjoy. And what starts to happen is over time, as our brain releases more dopamine, we get used to it. We develop a tolerance. It's like the idea of drinking a cup of coffee the first time makes you want to crash through the wall like the Kool-Aid man. But after drinking coffee for 20 years, it's kind of just enough to keep you awake. It's called a tolerance. Your brain gets the same thing with dopamine. As you get older, as your brain matures, it requires more dopamine to feel the same level of excitement that it used to. Alcohol is no different. When a person starts drinking, especially when they start drinking when they're young, alcohol releases and floods the brain with dopamine, makes it feel very good. And so what happens is the brain learns very quickly, I like this, keep doing it. And what happens is when the brain can't get alcohol, or when the brain does other things that it doesn't enjoy as much as alcohol, it begins to enjoy them even less. And when it's not drinking, it starts to feel even more unhappy. So what a person begins to feel is they need alcohol because when they can't drink, they feel anxious, they feel panicky, they feel like they can't sleep. Second thing, alcohol also likes to force GABA through the brain in the short term. This can make a person feel relaxed more quickly. This is why quite often when you see people very tense and very stressed when they drink a beer, when they have a glass of wine, they calm down in 20 minutes. It's because GABA is being synthetically forced through the brain. Over time, research has actually shown that alcohol can harm the brain's ability to produce this neurotransmitter naturally. So what starts to happen is the amount of GABA that's naturally available, the brain's capacity for calming itself down begins to worsen and it begins to decline. In essence, what starts to happen is as a person drinks more, their ability to manage anxiety gets worse, unless they are drinking. So when they're sober, they feel more stressed than they did before. Now, alcohol can also disrupt sleeping patterns, causing insomnia, making it difficult for a person to stay asleep, which can disrupt a person's ability to feel more conscious and alert the next day, which can compound onto their stress and anxiety. It's also worth noting that symptoms of hangovers can include anxiety, particularly for people living with disordered anxiety or problems with mood disorders. So, individuals that drink who are struggling with anxiety tend to feel more anxious the day after, the next day, the next day, which can make them feel like they didn't feel stressed when they drank, so they keep drinking. Does that make sense? Did I miss anything there, Sarah? You're taking your head shake as an affirmation.
Yeah, it just takes a moment for my unmute to work, but yeah, you're doing good.
No worries. We know about nicotine. Well, we know that 1 in 5 teens say they vape because they're trying to manage stress. Did you know that 1 in 5 teens also say the reason they vape is because they can't stop vaping? That they've become addicted, so therefore they are more stressed when they can't use? Fascinating, isn't it? Nicotine can increase attention, alertness, concentration while causing feelings of relaxation. Nicotine is a stimulant. Nicotine works like caffeine, only far more focused. Nicotine can enter the brain within seconds because when a person smokes, your lungs, your heart, your brain metabolize and move it to the brain very quickly. This causes a person to feel very relaxed within about 20 seconds to half a minute. But the problem with nicotine is its effects are fleeting. They tend to wear off after about 30 minutes to 2 hours, to some people 3 or 4 hours. And as nicotine wears off, the withdrawal symptoms of nicotine begin. These include restlessness, irritability, anxiety, insomnia, headache, difficulty in focus, and fatigue. Now, if we were to go back to before a person first vaped, if they mentioned that they were vaping due to anxiety, what symptoms do you think they were feeling when they were anxious, Sarah?
Um, like nervousness, like if they were, um, yeah, like feelings of nervousness,
A
being
little
fidgety,
hard to focus.
hard to focus, irritable, maybe.
So when they use nicotine and those feelings go away as the nicotine wears off, especially if whatever was causing them stress is still around, the stress is going to come back, right?
Absolutely.
Now, what if I told you nicotine withdrawal causes all of the exact same symptoms? So what starts to happen is you begin to have an entourage effect. In short, their stress doesn't get worse, it feels worse. So what are they going to do to manage their stress? Smoking helped the first time, vaping helped the first time. So what do you think they're going to do when they feel stressed again?
Maybe smoke more?
They continue smoking. New
Yeah.
users that begin to smoke or vape quickly develop a tolerance to the pleasure that nicotine causes. But the problem is, when the brain begins to withdraw from nicotine, it starts feeling all of the symptoms of anxiety that it felt before, but it often misdiagnoses these as being more anxiety. So, what it does is instead of saying, hey, the smoking made this worse, it's I feel worse, the smoking's going to make it better. So, very quickly, they become addicted to it. Now, the cravings can continue for weeks or months even after a person tries quitting. And what we also know is that individuals that consume nicotine, particularly teens, are more likely to go on to develop mood and anxiety disorders than those who don't. So they begin using to try to manage their anxiety in the short term, but what they find starts to happen rather quickly is their anxiety gets worse. But they can't blame the nicotine because the nicotine made them feel better when they were using. So again, makes them feel better, but it makes them feel worse. Cannabis. Fun fact, cannabis does the exact same thing. Cannabis includes a multitude of cannabinoids such as THC and CBD. Now, THC, or delta 9 tetrahydrocannabinol, is known for reducing feelings of anxiety in some people. But the problem is, it can increase feelings of anxiety in others. It can cause paranoia, it can cause delusions, difficulty in focus, difficulty with judgment, panic attacks, anxiety attacks, insomnia. In significant cases, people that overconsume on THC may experience extreme hallucinations, may experience significant delusions, heart palpitations, fever, vomiting. And in select cases, people that use heavy amounts of high levels of THC may even experience things that are known as cannabis induced psychotic episodes, whereby they may actually require medical treatment as they begin to reach the symptoms of a psychotic break, but not for a period of 5 to 6 hours. This could be someone experiencing these symptoms for a period of 2 to 4 weeks that may require hospitalization as a result to a heavy exposure of a high amount of THC. This is particularly risky for young people. Now, young people, and I ask them all the time why people smoke weed or what medical uses cannabis may have, many of them will talk about the idea that cannabis is a substance you can use to treat anxiety. Canadian Center on Substance Use and Addiction has stated multiple times there is no evidence that actually supports the use of cannabis to treat mood disorders. In fact, recent evidence coming from Ottawa and a combination of the Ottawa Health Unit as well as where is it? Right here. University of Ottawa, Ottawa Hospital, and the Institute for Clinical Evaluative Services found in 2024 that the heavy and regular use of cannabis does not reduce anxiety, but it actually increases the risk of anxiety disorders. Canadians who visited emergency departments due to cannabis use for any reason in a 12-year window from 2008 to 2019 were 4 times more likely to then develop anxiety disorders within 3 years than the general population, as well as being 4 times more likely to be hospitalized due to an anxiety disorder. Or, in short, the reason that cannabis is not prescribable as an anti anxiety medication largely is because one of the things that it tends to lead to is anxiety. Now, youth who also use cannabis are twice as likely to develop a cannabis use disorder because their brain is still developing. And similar to alcohol and nicotine, cannabis likes to pump a lot of dopamine through the brain, which can lead a youth to believe that cannabis is actually better for them than it actually is. We also know that youth who consume cannabis are at a greater risk of developing significant psychological disorders. And more recent research from CAMH has once again begun reestablishing a link between cannabis use and the onset of psychosis and schizophrenia, particularly for individuals under the age of 25, particularly for those under the age of 18, and particularly for those under the age of 16. Finally, opioids. What are opioids? Opioids produce feelings of euphoria, and they reduce feelings of physical pain. For anyone listening, does anyone not understand how an opioid does that? How does an opioid actually work? Is anyone not clear on that? I can kind of give you the Coles notes on how one works if it'll help. So, the way that an opioid works is it essentially blocks the receptors in the brain that recognize pain. So if I hit my elbow on my table while I'm presenting, it's not my elbow that tells me that I'm in pain. It's my brain that tells me that I'm in pain. So what an opioid will do is it will bind to the receptors in the brain that recognize that signal for pain. So when I hit my elbow and I get a signal from the arm that something has happened in my elbow, my brain can't understand it. So what happens is I don't feel pain. It's not because it made the pain go away, it's that it made me forget what pain is for a period of time. Now, opioids also create feelings of euphoria, of pleasure, of relaxation for many people. And the ways that they do this are by reducing breathing. They cut down the brain's ability to breathe properly. So, as our breathing slows down and our heart rate slows down, we start to physically relax. But the problem is consuming too many opioids or using too strong of an opioid, in particular heroin, fentanyl, carfentanil, is that these substances can actually cause the brain to forget how to breathe altogether, which can result in respiratory failure for a period of hours on end. And of course, if a person doesn't breathe for 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 hours, they're at risk of death. This is the crux of the fentanyl crisis that we have here in Canada, is that opioids make the brain forget how to breathe. But again, more on that in a different presentation. If we look at opioid use vis-a-vis stress, vis-a-vis anxiety, Yale University actually reports that opioids and nicotine both can cause a release of dopamine 10 times or more greater than the natural release of dopamine when we do things that we actually enjoy. So, again, those things that we do that bring us pleasure, imagine multiplying the pleasure that we got from those by 10. That's what our brain gets when we smoke a cigarette. That's what our brain gets when we use heroin, when we use morphine, when we use fentanyl, that level of pleasure. So, again, if a brain recognizes that as enjoyable, especially a young brain, it's more likely to turn to that to feel better than other things. This can cause a massive flow of pleasure, motivation, focus, all of which are emotions we seek to alleviate feelings of stress, of depression, of anxiety. And of course, that desire to find that can create dependency as a person starts to lose interest in other activities. Now, long term opioid use is actually associated not with reduction of anxiety, but an increase in anxiety. As the brain becomes more tolerant to the pleasure that an opioid creates, a person starts to feel that they need to use more to feel the same effects. And if they try not to use, say they completed a prescription or they're trying to quit using recreational opioids, they're at risk of experiencing significant withdrawal symptoms, including anxiety, generalized pain, chills, cramps, restlessness, insomnia, vomiting, and anxiety. Now, while these feelings are not fatal, they can be overpowering to the point that a person may feel a desperate need to continue using opioids in order to survive, which is not going to improve their physical health. In most cases, it's going to make it worse. All of this to say, when a youth says to you, does substance use help anxiety or make it worse? That's why the answer is both. It feels like it helps, but in the long term, it doesn't. Additional stressors can include, substance use can contribute to all sorts of stress in our lives. Decreased work and academic performance. Individuals that consume cannabis are more likely to skip class. They're more likely to struggle with short and long-term memory. Same with those that consume nicotine. Decreased work performance. This could be someone who drinks and can't come to work because they're hungover or loses their job for showing up at work while impaired. We see declining physical health. We know that tobacco reduces life expectancy by 12 years, and alcohol is associated with over 200 long and short term health risks. Cannabis itself, we know, is associated with increased risk of asthma, bronchitis, and even more recent research has actually shown a correlation between cannabis use and myocardial infarction, also known as heart attack. We see risk of overdose and hospitalization, particularly with fentanyl. We see the significant financial costs of substance use. The Heart and Stroke Foundation, for instance, reports that the average teen spends $15 a week on vaping. Canadian Cannabis Survey shows the average teen spends about the same on cannabis use. Now, if you compound that over a 12-month period, that would put cannabis and vaping costs alone at $1,500 a year for a teenager. Now, if they start vaping and smoking weed in grade 9, $1,500 a year for 4 years, that's $6,000 by the time they graduate high school. Now, if you throw alcohol on top of that, and the alcohol number is very poorly reported, don't really know why, but it is. We know the average household spends $1,200 a year on alcohol. So even if we said the teen spends $400 a year on alcohol, that's another $1,600. You throw that on top of the $6,000 for the vaping and cannabis, you now have $7,600 that a teen would spend on substance use in high school. Not even including if they smoke cigarettes or use opioids. Sometimes conversations about substance use are really conversations about financial literacy. One of my favorite things to talk about teens is asking them what would they do with 7 grand in their pocket. That's the difference between substance use and non-substance use for a lot of them. I know it's crazy, isn't it? Now, this brings us to the home stretch. You want to make your drug safety conversations appropriate to your child's age. Just as you would talk with your kids when they're young about critical safety issues that are important for them to know, you want to begin these conversations early on. You try to tailor the information that you provide and consider based on their age. Whatever their age, you always want to let them know, most of all, that you are there for them. So, how do we do that? We don't expect you to know everything about substance use. We don't expect you to know how that a substance will affect the lives of every child. I mean, I have to know a lot of it because it's my job to know a lot of it. But I don't expect that every single person that's going to listen is going to know every single thing that I do. Just like I'm not going to expect that I know everything that every single person who listens knows. So, with that in mind, we like to give you strategies to help prepare you as best as we can, including you get informed. That's why you joined today. Pick up a lot of new information. Or maybe none. Maybe you knew a lot of this already. Start young. Start your conversation early. Sometimes I get parents that say to me, well, I don't want to talk to my kid about drugs till they turn 19. And they say, well, I don't want to have that conversation until they're old enough to legally decide. Okay, fair point. The average age of onset substance use is 13 to 14. So if you wait for 6 years as they've been exposed to substance use around them, did that mean they didn't use for 6 years? You have to start this conversation young because the younger you start it, the more likely you are to curb harmful and risky substance use. Keep it casual. I keep throwing a lot of data at you and then coming up with ridiculous colloquialisms to try to bring you back. The reason I do that is because I'm trying to remind you this is a conversation. It's not a lecture. If there's things you want to know, you can ask me questions as we go along. Kids are going to do that to you. They do it all the time. Be willing to answer questions. Take breaks to answer questions. And if it leads you off track, like somebody gets led off track, it's okay. It's okay to get off track because the reason you did is they wanted to know something. Just like the reason some of you asked me questions that maybe didn't have to exactly with that slide, that's a good thing. It means you were thinking about something else. Keep it casual. Make your expectations clear. Practice and be flexible. That's part of practicing. You know how you go into a conversation with a 12-year-old and they always say exactly what you think they're going to say? Or you come up with a plan on how you're going to tell them what to do and they all just do exactly what you say that they're going to do? You mean kids aren't like that? That's like nailing jello to the wall or herding ducks? Of course it is. Because no one is like that. People talk about, well, how do I script these conversations? You don't. I'm going to give you some strategies and some things you can try to say, but you tailor them in a way that makes sense to you. And you understand they may not always be the speaking points. Now, how do you talk with kids at a different age? Well, the first thing to understand, if we look at younger youth, is that your tone matters. How you speak, your physical cues, your nonverbal cues. Young people pick up on these so much quicker than old people. And I'm saying that to be very blunt. I've done presentations for 8 and 9-year-olds before where they could tell I was exhausted before the teacher could. I come in and do a presentation for a grade 4 class. I get like 4 kids that are like, you look tired. It's not because they're being rude, it's they noticed that. Their teacher didn't notice it at all, right? They pick up on tone, they pick up on nonverbal cues. So the way you speak, the way you sit, if you're sitting with your arms crossed at them, you're not showing an open conversation. If you're leaned back, if your hands are apart, if you're inviting them to speak with you, you're creating more animation, you're inviting them to converse. Communicate your concerns about substance use. It's okay to point out what the harms of substance use are. It doesn't mean you scare them. Your goal is not to try to terrify them with substance use. It's to point out these things can realistically happen. I could give you a massive list of the health risks that alcohol causes. If you want to look at gout, if you want to look at FASD, if you want to look at low blood pressure, if you want to look at heart attack, if you want to look at stroke, if you want to look at blindness, you want to look at dry skin, you want to look at eczema, you want to look at impotence, you want to look at liver failure, you want to look at... I can give you that great big long list to take to kids. It's not going to do them any good unless they understand that that is a possibility and that they can talk about those as they go. Don't try to force it on them and say this is the only outcome. You communicate concerns, but you don't try to use fear tactics to do that. Get to know their friends, celebrate their healthy choices. Like I said, if you're having a conversation about smoking with your teen and your teen goes, I don't smoke, I play sports, that's great. Get them to tell you about sports. If they're interested in joining a team, see how they can do that. Establish clear expectations and find healthy activities to do together as a family. So, next, what happens when they get to high school? High schoolers, oh, they're totally easygoing and they have no stress and they listen to everything you say, right? Because that's how teens roll. Nah, no, they're social. They're defiant. They're trying to learn how to people, but they're still emotional. They're independent, but they do still need you. They do. And what you'll find is, remember how I said on the last slide, your tone matters? What especially matters with them is the importance of keeping calm, letting them have time in the conversation and giving them agency of when that time will be. Prom's coming up. Formals are coming up. We got a presentation I think we're doing next month about that very topic, if my memory serves me right. One of the things I'm going to mention in that presentation is the idea that you may want to have a conversation about impaired driving with your kids in the lead up to prom. If they don't want to have it today, that's okay. Agree on a time you can later. Pick a time that you're together, but negotiate it. Get to know their friends, because again, their friends change. They're not still going to love Bluey when they get to grade 12, unless they're my brother-in-law and he's 45 and still loves it. Their interests change. Encourage volunteering opportunities, encourage job opportunities. Kids, when they get to high school, they start building their resume. They start looking for ways to get themselves ready for post-secondary. They start thinking of ways to get themselves ready for the workforce. That's great. It is great to see that initiative. Within reason, you don't want them to burn out, but you encourage them. You offer to help them out however you can. That could be proofreading their resume. That could be making sure they can get to an interview on time. That could be setting up a ride share or a carpool to get them to a volunteer opportunity. Then they become post-secondary students and they leave the house, and mom and dad weep forever because the children are gone. Or they party because the house got quiet. I don't know what kind of parents you are. But the point is, your post-secondary youth are independent, but they are more likely to have experience with substance use. With that in mind, you keep an open line of communication even as they leave home. Encourage them to check in with you. Some parents, that's setting a night of the week to talk. Some parents, that's just saying, call or text me whenever you want. You know the process that works with your family. You know the process that works with your client. And it's different one client to the next. It is not one size fits all. Again, keep up on their interests. Discuss low-risk substance guidelines, and you can find these through the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, as well as the Canadian Center on Substance Use and Addictions. Discuss the risks of non-medical opioids, discuss the risks of stimulants and sedatives, or if they're in a college program, chances are some guy is going to come in and probably present it to their program anyways. And discuss substance-impaired driving and sober options for travel. You want to talk about active listening. This is something that's a skill that it comes up in a lot of different categories, a lot of different professions. It's a skill that requires a bit of practice, but it's highly effective. It's things like asking open-ended questions. Sarah, do you know what an open-ended question is?
Yeah, like an open-ended question would be a question that you can't give a one answer to. So for example, it's like, how was your day? Then you can embellish on something like, oh, my day was great, or and give more of a response. But if I were to ask you a yes or no question, you'll get one response and it doesn't really open the conversation.
You mean like when I asked you if you knew what an open-ended question was?
Exactly.
And you turned it around on me.
I
I thought you
could
were
have
going to give me
said
the
yes
closed-ended
and just
question.
ended it. Yeah,
You were good.
exactly.
You were a step ahead of me. Yes, no questions are closed-ended questions. So when I asked Sarah, do you know what one is? Yes, no. But you did a great job because I was going to ask you if you could explain an open-ended question. You explained it perfectly. Absolutely. Be positive. And what I mean by be positive, I'm not saying celebrate with them if they tell you they use drugs. When I say be positive, I mean show empathy, remind them that you care, and even keep the language in your messaging positive. For years, when we talked about impaired driving, we used to tell people if you drink, don't drive. Great message. Great message, correct message. You should not be driving if you drink. But if you do not provide a youth with another option, and all you've said to them is don't drink and drive, Saturday, 2 a.m. rolls around, they need to get home, what are they going to do? Some of them are going to drink and drive. So, what you do instead of telling them what not to do, have a conversation with them about what they can do instead. If you're going to drink, what can you do instead? Organize a ride share, call a cab, walk if you're safe, stay over if it's a safe space. You offer them and help them come up with other options. And when you do that, the human brain understands positive messaging better. Always has. We always understand what we can do. So you offer positive messaging. Let them know that you hear them, summarize what they say, ask permission, and offer your empathy and compassion. Now, when a youth says, I know you've talked with me about this before. Again, I'll give you some scripting here, but it's not going to be perfect. You might say it a different way. You can say, I know we've talked about it before. Sorry if it feels like I'm nagging you. Or you could say, I want us to be able to talk about it because I care for you. Now, why do you do that? It's the why that matters here. If they say, I know you've talked to me about this before, what you want to do is acknowledge that responsibility. The fact they've pointed out you've talked with them about it before, that's a good thing. That means they were listening, right? Acknowledge their feelings and express the fact that you care. I'm just bringing this up. I saw this today. I had this conversation today. Just want to know what you think about it. It's just a quick moment to check in. When a youth says, I only use once in a while or on the weekends, no big deal. You could ask them, some things that keep you from using more often than you do. Now, some people go, well, aren't you just trying to encourage them to use drugs there? Well, no. If you point out that you're glad to hear they're not using on a regular basis, that shows that you're proud of them. Great. You don't see them as a disappointment. But when you ask them about why they don't use, again, this is an opportunity for them to reaffirm their values. Why only use once in a while? Okay. What makes you say that? Why only use once in a while? Because I'm working, or I want to keep my grades up, or I don't feel well when I use this much. Now, what you're getting them to do is reaffirm their values and have a clearer understanding and even question where substance use stands in their life. There's a reason that it's a low priority for them. Get them to explain that to you. When they say, what's the big deal? I only did it once. Why'd you only try it once? Chances are, if they only tried it once, there was probably something that happened that made them not enjoy it. The most common reason that young people cite for trying cannabis, I'll give you an example, is curiosity. And I get parents that say to me all the time, I'm worried my kids told me they tried drugs. 60% of the time, kids who try cannabis don't continue using it. They'll use it once or twice and they don't use it again. They were curious because that's a human emotion, but they only tried it once. They didn't like how it made them feel. They were indifferent to how they felt. They didn't like the taste. There was something that turned them off of it. They only did it once. Okay, hey, great to know. You want to talk about why? And they will tell you why. Encourage that. What about when they say nothing? Well, some people find it hard to get their kids to talk about things. Some people find it hard to get their clients to talk about things. Try asking questions about the people around them about a given topic. You talked about drugs at school. You talked about substance use with other programs. Today, I did a presentation where some guy made a bunch of cheesy jokes, and somewhere in the middle of it, he talked about the fact that people use drugs to manage stress. What do you think about that? What you're doing is you're getting them to step back and be the expert with you. You're allowing them to look at a conversation. You're both on the same side. You're not analyzing them. You're getting them to share their knowledge and their experience as well. And you both get to analyze the topic while you step away from it together. But you used when you were younger. Well, my experience when I was younger showed me pot affects people differently. It's important, to think about if you're using, consider your own health and safety. You may want to point out that some of the things that happened when you used, if they know that you used in the past but you don't use anymore, talk about why you stopped. What was it that turned you off of using? And a little note for those of us who do use substances. If you use drugs, whether in front of a youth or not, be prepared for them to call you out about it. Take time to reflect on and maybe evaluate your own use. If you are showing youth that you drink, or you smoke, or you vape, or you use drugs to cope, that can send the wrong message. And if you are starting to realize, when I stop and think about this, I am drinking every time I have a bad day. I have been smoking or vaping more than before. I'm using stronger weed or more weed than I used to. That may be an opportunity for you yourself to consider reaching out for support on your own. And if you don't feel comfortable talking about it with them, put the focus back on them. What does my use affect you? And I want to know because I'm curious. How you feel is important to me. How does knowing that I use make you think differently on your decisions? Keep the conversation on that. Now, the very last thing, got about 5 minutes left, is to consider risk and protective factors. Someone asked me earlier about childhood abandonment and substance use. What you were talking about is a risk factor. Risk factors are the conditions that increase the likelihood of negative outcomes. They are not a precursor that guarantees negative outcomes. They simply influence the outcome or the likelihood. Risk factors for substance use can include a history of trauma, a history of neglect, a history of abuse in their life, a youth who grew up, say, being victimized, being marginalized, being taken advantage of, may be more likely to turn to substance use to feel a sense of security, of love, of support that they didn't get in their own youth when they didn't have that support. That was lacking. They looked for somewhere they could get it from. Pre-existing mental health issues. Youth who are struggling with anxiety or depression. They may have heard people using substances to feel better. They try it themselves. Poor parental monitoring can be a risk factor. A family history of substance use, a family rejection of a person's identity. LGBTQ youth are more times more likely to report substance use than other demographics. Transgender youth are more likely to report substance use than other genders. Now, why is that? For many of them, I actually had someone ask me once, kid you not, I did a presentation once. I pointed at the fact that transgender youth are more likely to use substances. The first thing they said to me, it was because they were irresponsible. And I said, huh, interesting. Now, what if I were to say to you in response that transgender youth are more likely to be kicked out of their own home? They're more likely to be assaulted. They're more likely to be raped. They're more likely to be robbed. They're more likely to be bullied. They're more likely to be isolated. They're more likely to be denied employment. They're more likely to be kicked out of their home. They're more likely to be fired from their jobs. They're more likely to be employed in precarious situations. So they're alone. They're marginalized. They're hurt. They're suffering. They're traumatized. They're not making money and they have nowhere to go. What would you do to feel better in that situation? Does that have anything to do with irresponsibility? Lack of school and community connectedness and low academic achievement are also risk factors to substance use, especially risky substance use. People that struggle, people that lack a feeling of accomplishment may be more likely to turn to drugs to try to get a sense of joy, a sense of pleasure. Finally, we have protective factors. They're the other side of the scale. These are the conditions that we as professionals do to increase the likelihood. This is effective engagement. It's open-ended questions. It's caring. It's support. It's creating physical spaces. It's creating inclusive spaces. It's promoting and celebrating an individual for their achievements, for their well-being. It's creating social inclusion. It's active community engagement. It's the academic success. It's all the things you guys do for a living. You are walking and breathing protective factors in everything you do. I appreciate when I get to present for groups of professionals because I appreciate you. I understand that this slide, I don't have to get into it in great detail because this is what you do. You create spaces at home. You do that by celebrating healthy choices. You do that by finding healthy activities. And those of you that are here as professionals, you do that by promoting sports teams, by organizing school events, by organizing post-second or intramurals, after-school programs. You do that by creating expectations that are equitable. You do that by sharing resources between you. That if a youth comes to you with a problem and you don't have the answer, you know where to look. You know where to help them look. And you encourage and promote unused drug drop-off and return to local pharmacies. I'm not going to shoehorn that last one in, but it is important. Keeping unused medications or expired medications out of the reach of children does act as a protective factor. Good. I see it as 2:28, and I know I'm sorry, it's 11:28. I live in Ontario. You know, I know. Everybody's gonna be like, "How did it take so long?" I know I talk a lot, but I don't talk that much. You guys are 11:30. But I do want to thank you all for joining. The very last thing I'm going to do before I wrap up is I do have a quick little post-workshop survey. Please feel free to take a moment to fill it out. I have the QR code there on the screen if you've got a phone, and if you don't, You can also grab the link here. It's just an office form. I see.
Yeah.
Now, I do see
Thanks
there's some
so
questions left in the chat. Is there something
yeah.
you wanted to add there?
No, I just was going to say thank you so much, Steve. It was such a great presentation. Just excellent. I think we're going to stop recording the session now so that if there are any final questions, it is almost 11:30. So if you do need to get on with your day, we certainly